The rain fell hard that night, a kind of relentless downpour that blurred the city lights into watercolor streaks across the window pane. Inside a small coffee shop near the old bridge, a boy sat alone, staring at his reflection in the glass, eyes hollow, fingers trembling around a cup that had gone cold long ago. His name was Aiden. He was 17, but his face looked older, worn by too many broken promises and too much silence. On that same rainy night, fate decided to bring into his life the person who would change everything, not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with a quiet, healing strength of love that asks for nothing in return. If you believe that kindness still matters, that second chances can rewrite the saddest stories, take a moment right now. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's spread stories that remind the world how love can still find us even in the darkest moments. Aiden had grown up in a home that looked perfect from the outside: polished gates, tidy gardens, a house with laughter that didn't belong to him. His parents were successful but distant. They loved him. He knew that. But love had never been spoken in words, never been shown in gentle touches or listening hearts. He learned early to hide his feelings behind sarcasm and long hours at the basketball court. He smiled when expected, performed when needed. But every night he returned to the silence of his room, the kind of silence that doesn't just fill space but drowns your thoughts. That night in the coffee shop, Aiden wasn't waiting for anyone. He just wanted to escape the noise of his thoughts. But then, the door swung open with the sound of a small bell, and in walked a girl who looked like the world hadn't yet touched her spirit. Her name was Lyla. She was new in town, carrying a wet backpack, a book under her arm, and a smile that somehow managed to make the storm outside feel distant. She ordered a hot chocolate, then looked around for a place to sit. Every table was full except the one across from Aiden. She hesitated before walking over, asking softly if she could share the table. Aiden shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but inside something shifted. Her presence was calm, not loud, not demanding. She opened her book, occasionally glancing at him, not out of curiosity but out of quiet understanding, as if she could see he was a storm waiting to break. Days turned into weeks, and soon that coffee shop became their unspoken meeting point. Lyla wasn't like the people Aiden knew. She didn't ask questions to fill silence. She asked them to understand. She noticed things: how Aiden's hands fidgeted when he was anxious, how his eyes softened when talking about his grandmother, the only person he truly missed. Aiden found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about how he felt invisible at home, how his father only looked up from his phone to correct him, how he sometimes walked aimlessly at night just to feel the wind against his face. Lyla listened, not to fix him, not to lecture, just to listen. And in that listening, Aiden began to breathe again. But as winter arrived, Lyla started to change. The vibrant energy in her laughter dulled, her hands sometimes shook, her eyes, once full of light, grew heavy. Aiden noticed, of course. He always did. One afternoon, when the snowflakes fell like tiny whispers outside the cafe window, Lyla finally told him the truth. She had leukemia. It wasn't new. She had been fighting it for 2 years. Her family had moved here for her final round of treatment, hoping this hospital would be different, hoping for a miracle that doctors had stopped promising. Aiden's heart shattered. Not the kind of shattering that makes you cry instantly, but the kind that leaves you speechless, frozen, afraid to breathe because the air feels too heavy to carry. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be terrified of losing someone you weren't even sure you deserved to have. Lyla, however, didn't let sorrow define her days. She still came to the cafe, still carried her books, still drew tiny sketches of birds and stars in the margins. She said that life wasn't about how long you had but how deeply you loved while you were here. Aiden began walking her home after school, sometimes sitting with her on the hill overlooking the frozen lake, where they would watch the sunset and talk about everything: the meaning of dreams, the sound of silence, the courage it took to keep smiling. The closer they grew, the harder it became for Aiden to accept what was coming. He wanted to believe love could conquer anything, but love doesn't cure illness. It doesn't stop pain. It only makes you wish harder for time. Still, Aiden didn't give up. He read about alternative treatments, spent hours researching late into the night, even wrote letters to doctors in other countries. But deep down, Lyla knew. She could feel her strength fading, like a candle flickering in the wind. One cold morning, when the first rays of sunlight touched the frost-covered grass, Aiden found Lyla sitting alone on that same hill, a small sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing them, two figures sitting side by side, holding hands beneath a sky filled with paper birds. She smiled at him, her eyes tired but peaceful. "When I'm gone," she whispered, "don't stop coming here. The sunsets will still be beautiful, even if I'm not sitting next to you." Aiden wanted to argue, to promise her he'd fix everything, but his voice broke before the words could form. Instead, he sat beside her, held her trembling hand, and watched the sky turn from gold to pink. That was the last sunset they saw together. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Just like that. A quiet hospital room, a window left open so the wind could touch her one last time, and a boy who finally understood what it meant to have loved someone enough to never forget. For days, Aiden didn't speak. He didn't go to school, didn't answer calls, didn't return to the cafe. The world had lost its color. The rain that once comforted him now only reminded him of the night they met. But then, one evening, while cleaning his desk, he found Lyla's sketchbook. On the last page was a note written in her uneven, fragile handwriting: "Aiden, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't let my story end with sadness. Promise me you'll keep living, that you'll turn our memories into strength, not pain. Go see the world I couldn't. Draw, write, love, and never forget that somewhere, somehow, I'm proud of you. Love, Lyla." Aiden cried for hours that night, not because she was gone, but because she had given him something death couldn't take: a purpose. From that day on, he began to live differently. He joined a volunteer group that helped kids with terminal illnesses. He shared Lyla's story with families who had lost hope. Slowly, piece by piece, he rebuilt himself, not into who he was before, but into someone Lyla would have recognized. Someone kind, brave, real. Years passed. The world changed, but Aiden never forgot the hill by the frozen lake. Every year, on the day she left, he returned with a notebook and sketched the sunset, always two figures beneath a sky full of paper birds. One day, while sitting there in quiet reflection, a little girl approached him. She was holding a paper bird of her own and asked if she could leave it with his drawings. When he asked her name, she smiled and said, "Lyla. My mom said you knew her once." Aiden froze. The girl's mother, standing a few steps away, smiled softly, and in her eyes, he saw the same light he had fallen in love with years ago. It wasn't Lyla, of course, but someone who had been named after her, someone whose mother had once been one of the hospital nurses who had taken care of Lyla in her final days. She had heard the story of the brave girl who smiled through pain, who believed in love stronger than fear. Aiden felt tears fill his eyes, not of grief, but gratitude, because love, he realized, never really dies. It leaves echoes in the people we touch, in the stories we tell, in the sunsets we remember. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love, even when brief, can change lives forever, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to keep more true and emotional stories alive. And before we end, here's a special request: to comment below what true love means to you. Is it sacrifice, patience, or simply being there when no one else is? Your words might inspire someone who needs to read them today. As the sun dipped behind the hills that evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, Aiden closed his eyes and smiled. He could almost feel Lyla beside him, not in body, but in spirit, whispering through the wind, reminding him that some love stories don't end when the last page turns. They live on, quietly, endlessly, in the hearts they've healed. And so, under the fading light, Aiden whispered her name one last time, not with sorrow, but with peace, knowing that true love doesn't fade. It transforms. It teaches. It lives forever.